In this video, I'll show you how to make a no-filter mini indoor pond for some tiny cherry shrimp. Be sure to stick around to the end as something truly amazing happens 90 days in. Here's the tank that I'll be using. I built it myself from an old aquarium. I'll put a link to a similar sized tank in the description. It's already got a foam mat on the bottom, so let's get straight into the idea that I've got for this setup. I want to have a nice tall structure on the left side with lots of immersed plants growing around it. This will leave a really good water volume for the shrimp, which I think they'll appreciate. To build the hardscape, I've got a selection of driftwood and cereal stones. I think the contrast between these two has the potential of creating a really nice natural looking scape. As always, I leave a good amount of time to experiment with multiple different layouts and structures until I find something I'm happy with. In this case, it didn't take too long, and I really like how these two pieces come together to look like the base of a tree. To make things a whole lot easier, I'm going to lock these two pieces together. This is super easy to do by wedging some tissue between the contact points and then soaking it in some liquid type superglue. It dries really quickly and forms a strong bond that is completely safe for the shrimp. I always like to add a couple more contact points just to make sure that they don't come apart in the future. Now this piece is really solid, I can place it in the tank and move on with the hardscape. I'm not pushing it all the way towards the back as I do want some substrate and plants to go behind it. Now I can take the stones and start placing them inside. Same as the wood, it's a case of trial and error and finding out which stones fit and look good together. I need to try and arrange them to create a retaining wall which will stop the substrate that will sit behind the driftwood from rolling down into the water. Here's what I've come up with so far. I'm really liking how it's looking, but it's getting hard to build any more as I keep on knocking everything over. Same as I did with the wood, I'm going to lock everything down in place with the super glue and tissue method. This will not only make building the scape much easier, but it'll also mean when doing maintenance in the future, I haven't got to worry about completely destroying the hardscape. Here's the hardscape all locked together, and it's even strong enough to be taken out as one entire piece. I think it looks great inside the tank, and there's still plenty of room in behind the driftwood for the immersed plants. Now I'm going to take some fine filter floss and plug the holes throughout the retaining wall. It is important to do this because if you don't, the substrate will leak through these holes onto the sand and it certainly won't look too good. You might be thinking that the white filter wall is a bit of an eyesore, but you won't be able to see it by the end as it's super easy to hide with moss and plants. With all the holes plugged in, I can now move on and start making the pond look much more natural. I'm starting with a layer of fine sand. A paintbrush comes in handy to spread the sand out throughout the scape. I think this small piece of cereal stone looks good as an island in the middle of the sand. To make the transition from the sand up to the hardscape look more natural, I'm going to add some of these small stones. I'm not overthinking their placement too much, but as a good rule of thumb, there should be more around the base of the rocks, with there being less and less as it goes out into the open sand. To tie everything together, I've got some fine gravel which I'll sprinkle on top. In my opinion, I think the combination of these materials really makes the scape look a lot more natural. To improve the detail and interest even more, I'm going to add some small spiderwood branches. I'm going to place these at the base of the driftwood to look like roots growing down over the rocks. Once I'm happy with their placement, I'll use some gel type superglue to lock them down. I should mention I'll list all the materials I've used for this build in the description below, along with some links in case you want to try making something like this yourself. I'm extremely happy with how the hardscapes turned out, and I love the detail that the small twigs bring. What I'm going to do now is fill in the space behind the hardscape with substrate. Aqua soil is going to be perfect for this as it holds a good amount of nutrients and it's not going to stagnate from sitting in still water. Before adding any plants, I'm giving the entire scape a good spray down. To kick off the planting, I've got some Anubias and Bucephlandra. I'm preparing them by taking them out the pots and removing all the rock wool before planting. You can plant them as they are, but I like to split them up into a few different sections. As these plants are epiphytes, all I'm going to do to plant them is wedge them in gaps and cracks throughout the scape. They grow great both under and above the water, so I'm planting them accordingly. I think some Anubias growing on this small rock would be a nice addition. As there's no gaps to wedge it into, I'm using a small amount of gel type superglue to mount it to the rock. Even with just a few plants in, I'm loving how this mini pond has sprung to life and is starting to take shape. These plants really don't like drying out, so it's important to give them a light spray down every now and then. Next up, I've got a plant which I think will help take this scape to the next level. These are asparagus ferns, and my favourite thing about them is that they resemble small miniature trees. I'm using some long tweezers to dig a hole down into the aqua soil and then planting them inside. I'm really hoping that they thrive in this setup. Next, I want to plant some hydrocotyle to grow right at the water's edge. I'm hoping this will fill out some space and have some nice dense growth. As this is a no filter setup, I'll be relying on the plants to clean the water and act as the filter. This here is some Alternanthera mini. Under good lighting, it has some really nice vibrant red leaves. It is an aquatic plant, but I have grown it great inside terrariums. I'm not sure how it's going to do in this setup, as I'm going to try and grow it in the open air. It might die off due to lack of humidity, but I'd say it's worth a try. Now the planting's complete, I'm absolutely loving how this mini indoor pond is looking. I think it's about time I fill it up with water. I've placed in some bubble wrap to help disperse the water and stop it from disrupting the scape. All I'm using for this setup is some dechlorinated tap water. This certainly wouldn't be a mini pond without some floating plants. I'm placing in a few different species to add some nice detail and contrast to the surface of the water. Their fast growth will also help balance the pond's mini ecosystem. Just over 4 weeks have passed and the mini pond is thriving. For the most part, all the plants are growing in really well and I've had no problems with algae whatsoever. The only change I've made is replacing the Alternanthera with some Fittonia as it started to struggle due to lack of humidity. A couple weeks ago I did introduce some small snails into the water, but I think it's about time that I add even more life. I'm introducing a small group of red cherry shrimp which will call this pond their home. If conditions are perfect, they'll end up breeding, which will be great to see. It's only been 3 weeks since I introduced the shrimp and something amazing has happened. There's not one, but 2 females carrying loads of tiny eggs. Fingers crossed they stay healthy and develop into loads of baby shrimp. The mini pond is doing great, as are the shrimp. The females are still carrying the eggs just as they should be. The small black dots on the eggs are actually the eyes of the baby shrimp. This really is great to see, and hopefully they'll be hatching in no time at all. Here we are 3 months later after setting up this mini pond ecosystem. It's been an absolute joy to watch it grow and evolve over the past 90 days. Before taking a look inside the water, let's talk about some of the plants. The floating plants have got to be one of the highlights for me. I think the variety and species really adds to the natural look of the tank. The Hydrocotyle is doing exceptionally well and it's even sent some runners over the glass on the outside of the pond. I love how they look, so I certainly won't be cutting them back. The Fittonia did die off slightly as it acclimated, but it seems to have bounced back strong with these vibrant pink leaves. One change you've probably noticed is in the asparagus fern behind the driftwood. The original fern unfortunately started to die off, so I switched it with this. This could have been for a number of reasons, but my best guess is that it struggled to acclimate to the humidity as I pulled it out a very humid setup. Now let's take a look into the water, as there's some really exciting things going on inside. At first glance you can't really see much other than the adult shrimp, but as you look a bit closer a whole nother world opens up. The eggs the female were carrying have finally hatched, and here are the babies. They're no more than 12 hours old and only a couple millimeters in size. In this shot here, you can really get an idea of just how tiny they are. On the left is one of the adults, and it looks like an absolute giant in comparison. As I look around the tank, I can see more and more of them. They seem to especially like hiding out in the roots of the floating plants. It goes without saying that this setup isn't going to be big enough for all these shrimp as they start to grow up. Luckily for them, I've got a giant ecosystem in need of some shrimp. This is a future build coming out on the channel, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. I'd love to hear what you think of this build in the comments below.